Hi, this is Jason Cascarino, your host for the Lessons in Adolescence podcast. A quick programming note. We are modifying our format slightly. While we value longer form conversations with our guests, we know that for many who tune in, a shorter time frame fits better with their podcast listening habits. So going forward, we will split our interviews into two roughly equal parts, with a quick pause in the middle. Each segment will run about 15 to 20 minutes. We hope the pause will help some listeners engage with our content better in shorter blocks, while also being just a brief intermission for those who like the longer conversation at one go. We hope you enjoy it either way. Also, please note that, as always, for each episode, we compile a list of additional readings and resources that are referenced in the episode. You can find links to those at remakingmiddleschool.org or embedded in the podcast description on your podcast platform. Lessons in Adolescence is a production of the Remaking Middle School Initiative, whose founding partners include Youth-Nex, the University of Virginia's Center to Promote Effective Youth Development, and the Association for Middle Level Education, or AMLE. You can learn about Remaking Middle School on the web at remakingmiddleschool.org. Now, here's this episode. Hello and welcome to the Lessons in Adolescence podcast, where we explore the many facets of young adolescents in the middle school years, from the adverse to the awkward to the awesome. I'm your host, Jason Cascarino. Today I talk with Alec Lee and Terrence Riley. Alec is co-founder and CEO of the 35-year-old Aim High Summer Learning Program for middle school youth. Terrence is an alumnus of the program and now Vice President of Programs for the organization. Aim High offers a mix of academic classes and interest-driven enrichment activities for middle school students during the summers leading into, during, and transitioning out of the middle grades. Like other summer learning programs in the summer of 2020, Aim High needed to pivot from its traditional in-person model to a virtual one, called Aim High at Home, which, as Alec says, had some advantages that the program intends to keep going forward, even as they steadily transition back to in-person programming.
We did better around parent engagement and learning. We had more professional development for teachers because teachers were connecting from different campuses and regions virtually through Aim High and our platform. So there's some pieces that we're going to keep. And then, as Terrence knows probably better than anybody, we have a lot of school districts that are coming to us and saying, we have some kids who could really benefit from Aim High at Home this summer and Aim High in person in 2022 and beyond. So it's a tremendous opportunity for Aim High and other summer learning providers.
In part one of our conversation, Alec, Terrence, and I talk about the genesis of the Aim High program, the specific components of the experience, the types of students who participate, how the organization recruits and trains its staff, which includes local teachers in training and also alumni of the program, and the outcomes they are seeing across academic, social, and emotional domains, as well as the students' transition into high school and even longer term. In part two, we go into the pivot that Aim High had to make to deliver programming during the pandemic, creating Aim High at Home, how they shifted the levels of emphasis on different aspects of the programming to build belonging and community, and how they ramped up training for summer educators. We also address what they anticipate this upcoming summer will look like, and its outsized importance given COVID recovery efforts, and what the future of summer learning looks like longer term. That's a little bit later. Now, here's part one of my interview with Alec Lee and Terrence Riley. Alec, Terrence, it's so nice to have you two on here with me. Thanks so much for joining and taking the time.
Thanks for having us. It's great to be here.
Yeah, our pleasure.
So I'm eager to talk about Aim High and summer learning for middle school age youth, but let's set the table here first with learning a little bit about the both of you. Alec, you first. You've been at this for quite some time, 17 years as a teacher, 35 years running Aim High, a lot of that concurrently. It looks like you've found something to be your life's work and have really stuck with it. Tell me how you found it and why you stuck with it.
Yes, it has been my life's work, and it's been a joy and an amazing journey. So I appreciate the question. When I graduated from college, I spent 4 summers working for a program outside Detroit, Michigan, called Horizons Upward Bound. And Jason, I'm sure you've heard of Upward Bound programs. There's hundreds of them across the country, started by Lyndon Johnson as part of his Great Society program. And those are college access programs for high school kids, typically making a multi-year commitment to kids and families. And so Hub, as it's known, and it still exists, by the way, was really the inspiration for me. I moved to San Francisco in 1985. As you pointed out, I was a high school teacher, and during my first year of teaching, myself and another teacher had the idea of starting a middle school program in San Francisco, making a multi-year commitment to kids and teachers, and really using Horizons Upward Bound as the inspiration. But as you pointed out, focusing on middle school. And I wrote a grant to a foundation. I'd actually never heard of foundations. I had no idea what they were. But I wrote a grant to the San Francisco Foundation. And on April 1st, I'm not making that up, I got a call. This was obviously pre-email and internet, and said, we're going to fund you for $25,000 a year for the first 2 years to launch Aim High. But that was the inspiration: middle school, summer learning, but also community and belonging and connection were really the kind of guiding principles when we launched back in 1986.
Yeah, we're going to talk about all of those things, I think, and touch upon those great assets of the organization and your work. Terrence, I'd love to hear from you. It looks like you've come up through the ranks at Aim High, certainly on staff for the past 11 years or so. But starting out, if I'm not mistaken, having been a participant in the program yourself, was that experience a motivator for you to get involved in youth programming? Because you started out your career as an adult, at least doing some other things in business. Was the experience at Aim High as a young person what brought you back? Or were there other experiences that compelled you to ultimately get into the field of education and youth service?
Yeah, absolutely. It was Aim High. I was fortunate enough to have a mother that was very scrappy when I was in middle school and growing up, and she sought out different great opportunities for me that were free, accessible, engaging, and Aim High was at the top of that list. So Aim High has been a part of my life since I was in middle school. I tell this story often, but Alec came into my middle school classroom and talked to us about Aim High and that we could do a summer program that was fun and engaging and we could try new things. And it was in a different neighborhood than I lived in and was used to. And so I was sold from there and went home and told my mom, like, I want to do this program. And so she did everything she could to get me in it. And so I participated. It was a great program to be a part of in middle school. In high school, I was a teaching assistant for Aim High. So for my summers in high school, I taught in the program. And then, as you mentioned, I went on to college and I started my career really in the movie industry and doing some other things in Southern California. But I always had this voice inside my head, telling me like I should do more. I should be giving back to my community. I want students who come from where I come from and look like me to be able to have the same opportunities that I was so fortunate to have. And so that's really how I got into education and went to grad school for education. And once I was in grad school and realized, the direction I wanted to go in, educational nonprofit was the path that I saw best fit me and suited what I wanted to accomplish. And once I realized that, Aim High was at the top of my list. And so by chance, there was an open position that I saw. I kind of stalked the Aim High website for, maybe a couple months, saw a position pop up and applied and went for it and haven't looked back. And as you mentioned, I've worked in various different positions throughout my tenure at Aim High.
Terrence, I'd love to have you take us through what the Aim High program experience is, since you lived it and are now the vice president of programs. But first, Alec, as the co-creator, let's go back to the beginnings here. And you mentioned some of this, but give us more of a sense for why Aim High exists in the first place. Give us more detail on what was the genesis. You started in the 1980s. What problem were you trying to solve, or what opportunity were you looking to take advantage of?
Well, such a great question. I like to kind of frame it as, why do we matter? Why does aim high matter? But I also like the way you phrased it, which is what's the problem we're trying to solve? And I'll give you sort of a top three. The program did start in 1986, so we've been at it for 35 years. Number one was summer learning and summer learning loss. And at that time, it was just beginning to emerge that summer learning matters, especially for kids with limited opportunities. And as Terrence himself pointed out, he was one of those kids. We've had 15,000 kids go through the program since then. So summer learning loss is real, it's cumulative. So it was an opportunity to problem solve around that. And then the second was middle school. And I know you're keen on middle school and why it matters. And again, in the mid-'80s, there was emerging research that said middle school is a critical juncture in the lives of kids. Performance in 8th grade, transition to high school are key indicators around on-time high school graduation and college matriculation. So again, why do we matter? Middle school matters. And then the third, and this one is a little bit more ambiguous, but no less important, is community matters. Community was really important to me growing up. The schools I went to, the summer camp I went to, I really believe in community. I believe it doesn't happen by accident. It happens on purpose. And so beginning that first summer of Aim High, my colleague Eleanor McBride and I designed a program that really focused deliberately and intentionally on community and belonging. Of course, in addition to academic enrichment and the classes that all of our students take and the activities, the college-going culture, but fundamentally, at the core, community, connection, belonging. Those are really the guiding principles around the launch of Aim High. And my gosh, who knew that we'd go from one campus, 50 kids in 1986 to 18 programs across Northern California, typically over 2,000 kids a summer. It's been a great story, and those guiding principles have been with us from day one.
Yeah, that's a remarkable growth story. Terrence, let's go a little bit deeper into the programming, if we can. I think most of us have in our minds the summer learning experiences that we had when we were young. Alec, you were sort of referencing that and the effect that it had on us. Aim High has its own flavor and its own goals for what it's trying to do. And we'll talk about the changes in programming due to the pandemic in a moment. But let's talk about pre-COVID now. I would love to know more about the youth who participate in Aim High and why they participate, how you find them, how you get them involved. And then what specifically are you offering them? What does the programming look like? What is the Aim High experience?
Yeah, so Alec just hit on this a second ago, but if I could put Aim High in kind of one word, which is pretty hard to do, but I would choose belonging. I think that's what we want to build in our program. That's what we want our students and staff to feel is a sense of belonging. When you walk through that door, we want you to see educators that look like you and come from the same neighborhoods that you come from, have the same life experiences that you do. We want students to see other students that look like them, but maybe come from different schools and different neighborhoods, but they can form this community together each and every summer. It's really a magical experience that our students get to feel each and every summer. But the way the program works, first and foremost, we make a 4-year commitment to our students. So our students join Aim High typically the summer after 5th grade, and they participate every summer until they go off to high school. And that way we are able to cover 2 critical transitions in youth development, the transition into middle school, as well as the transition into high school. We are first and foremost an academic program, but we also want to make sure that our students' voices are heard, that they see themselves in the work that we are doing, in the stories that we are reading. So we offer 4 classes at Aim High, math, science, humanities, and a really cool youth development class that we created called Issues and Choices. This is a class where, again, students can learn about different cultures, learn about their identity, learn about their communities and their sense of belonging, and explore the issues that most teenagers are dealing with at this time. And then in the afternoon, again, it's around student voice and choice, and letting students be able to do fun activities, things that they don't typically get to do or have exposure to. So they do sports, they do arts, they do dance, they do music, they do, all the fun summer enrichment things that you can think of. We try to give them that opportunity to do that and try something new. The program is 5 weeks, so we are able to cover a broad range of topics academically and enrichment wise during that 5 weeks to support our students.
Yeah, I love the fact that you focus so much on transitions, and particularly transitions both in and out of middle school. I think there's a lot of conversation, a lot more perhaps programming that is dedicated towards that transition into high school. It gets a little bit caught up in this idea that some people have that middle school is really just high school prep. And I think those of us here in this conversation probably think more of the middle grades than that. But I would love to hear a little bit more about the students themselves. Where do they come from? Who are they? What kinds of populations of students are you working with? It sounds like they come from multiple places and they don't necessarily know each other, not from one single site.
Yeah, that's true. So as Alec mentioned, we typically have 18 sites across the Bay Area serving over 2,000 students. And our students come from all over. So they are overwhelmingly students of color. They are students from low income neighborhoods and communities, but we do try to be diverse in how we formulate our sites and put students together because we want them to have new experiences with new people. We partner very closely with our school partners and local schools and other local CBO organizations to recruit our students and give them our student profile, what we look for in a student. Again, it's basically students of color, students with limited access to summer opportunities, students from low income communities, students who are motivated to really try new things and step out of their comfort zone. Those are the students that we look for. And we work really closely with our partners to try to find those students every summer. And then as far as like our application process, we do have an application process because, as I just mentioned, we want those students who are motivated to try new things and understand that summer learning doesn't mean summer school. We have an application process where we ask our students to commit to our program. We want to know a little bit about them. We have them write short answer questions to say, kind of, what are your hopes and dreams? If you had magical powers, what would you do with those powers? Really understanding where our students are coming from and what they're thinking about and dealing with, and also just asking them to make a commitment to Aim High. And we do the same thing for our parents. Why do you want your student involved in Aim High? What are you looking for your student to develop in our program? Different things like that. So that's really the basis of our recruitment strategy and our application process.
Alec, when you think about resources for summer learning, there's obviously financial resources that are needed, but I also think about people, about talent. And I wonder if it's hard to recruit good talent for the summer. I mean, present company here suggests that that's not the case since, Terrence, you were a teacher in the program. But how do you find people? How do you train them? How do you support them to do this work?
Well, yes. I mean, good for you for pointing out the challenge around that. And there's some challenges that I think are acute to San Francisco and the Bay Area around cost of living and commuting and so forth. And we're not immune to those challenges. Terrence mentioned we typically have 18 programs. In a typical summer, 7 of those are in San Francisco. And you read the paper, San Francisco has become very costly. And so there's challenges around teacher recruitment. But we work really closely with a number of schools of education, teacher training program. We work with aspiring teacher programs in districts. But the other piece, Terrence pointed out, is we have this very robust assistant teacher program. Those are typically college students. And then we have an intern program for high school students. And typically 60, 70% of that group are Aim High graduates. And Terrence was that once upon a time, long ago. He was a high school intern. So, when I think about the impact of Aim High, first and foremost, it's kids and families. It's our youth. but also the impact on experienced teachers, Jason, and then aspiring teachers. And we have started to track that. We have started to track assistant teachers and do they go on to get their credential and teach in partner schools. We're at the point now, Jason, we've been around a long time. So our graduates, they're all grown up, right? And several of them now, Jason, are directors of AIM High campuses around San Francisco and Oakland and other parts of the Bay Area. But make no mistake, it's a challenge. But I think what draws people to AIM High, as you pointed out, is it's a very different kind of teaching and learning experience. We like to remind ourselves every summer and every day, dare to be different. And so our teachers have a chance to mentor young people. Our teachers have a chance to use AIM High as a teaching laboratory around interdisciplinary projects and team teaching. So there's a lot that draws people.
You were talking about impact and measuring impact. What are the things that you are seeing among the youth? How do you track that? What are you looking for? How does that connect to what others in the education space, maybe in school, are also wanting to know and looking for in terms of performance or in terms of how well the youth are doing?
I would just say that, we have very extensive measures that we do to track our students. We really want to make sure that we are not only constantly improving our program, but providing the best outcomes for our students and the best support for what they need. And so we do a lot of surveying. We survey our students, we survey our parents, we survey our teachers. We do observations for our summer program in order to continue to gain insights and to improve. And what we're seeing is that students are improving. Not only are they improving academically and gaining that learning loss, we are lowering that gap. And what I feel is pretty important is that we are making them lifelong learners. They are feeling more engaged in school. They are feeling more confident in their abilities. They are, finding their community and finding their sense of belonging. So just as important as, academics are, that social emotional development, that really sense of confidence in students' abilities and voices is very important. And so that's what we really try to measure each and every summer.
And Jason, if I could expand on that and connect it to one of your very first questions, why do we exist? Why do we matter? Fundamentally, what we measure is transition to high school. So as Terrence pointed out, AIM High Youth, their final summer is the summer before ninth grade. So we measure and capture that transition to high school in terms of course placement, test scores, attendance. That's something, that we can really take credit for. Additionally, we do track our students using the National Student Clearinghouse and also our own internal tracking and measure on-time high school graduation, matriculation to 2- and 4-year college. You've probably seen, we have extremely high, fantastic results around that. And I should point out, we can't take all the credit for that. We know we can take part of the credit, and we're excited to do that. So, we see growth over the summer, during the school year, transition to high school, and then post-AIM High, high school graduation, et cetera. Jason, I know you do your homework, so you've probably seen we've engaged with the Gardner Center twice around an implementation study, which was just an exceedingly positive step for us. And then we just concluded an impact study with them in partnership with San Francisco Unified.
That was part 1 of my interview with Alec Lee and Terrence Riley. In part 2, we talk about how AIM High is planning to make the most of this important upcoming summer after a year of pandemic and remote and hybrid learning, as well as what's in store long-term for AIM High and the summer learning field. That's in just a moment on the Lessons in Adolescence podcast, where we feature conversations with researchers, practitioners, program developers, and advocates for young adolescents in the middle school years. Recently, I talked with Rachel Graham, Director of Programs at the Lefkofsky Family Foundation in Chicago, founded by Liz and Eric Lefkofsky. The foundation has made middle grades its singular focus for its education funding, important in a city where young adolescents have the opportunity to apply to enroll in one of many selective and specialty high schools outside their neighborhood. The Foundation's Success Bound program helps K-8 elementary schools in Chicago use developmental science to better prepare their middle grade students to be thoughtful and planful of their futures as they make consequential decisions in their choice of high school.
I remember specifically going to a high school fair one year and asking students why they selected a specific high school, and their responses, which were on average made for very superficial reasons. I mean, one student told me that they chose a high school because they saw cool robots on the table. And so when I pressured him a little more, I was like, well, how close is that school to your house? He was like, oh, that's a great question. I should go ask. And so it just made clear to us, to Liz and I really, that something was missing. If we're asking students to make life-determining decisions in 8th grade, then we need to have conversations with them about who they are, what they're passionate about, and what they want for their future starting much earlier than 8th grade.
You can catch all of my conversation with Rachel in a previous episode. And now, returning for part 2 of my conversation with Alec Lee and Terrence Riley. Let's switch a little bit to our present circumstance. Alec, I was reading up on Aim High, and I came across a recent article, and as a part of it was how you're responding to the pandemic. You were quoted in a piece by Andrew Ball. This was for the Harvard Graduate School of Education Centennial publication, which came out late last year. You say, quote, "I can't emphasize enough that social emotional needs are the focus. Creating safe places for kids to reflect and process, to grieve, and also to see their friends from previous summers." And I was drawn by 2 points in that statement. First, your point about grieving. I feel like that process of grieving hasn't been talked about quite enough, just making the space for that and supports around that, particularly for those hardest hit by the pandemic, and also particularly those in this stage of young adolescent development that we've been talking about, and the lasting impact that these types of experiences have on youth of this age, particularly. The second was seeing friends from previous years, which to me speaks of the power of relationships, which we've been talking about a lot on this podcast of late. And again, it has specific resonance for this age group. Say more about these ideas and the range of supports that young adolescents need right now from programs like Aim High in our current circumstance.
Well, I think we'll both be commenting on this, I'm sure, because Terrence and the program team were responsible for the pivot that we made last spring, a year ago. And, pivot is everybody's favorite word. And we had to do it. We were not going to not do Aim High this summer. So it was a time for reimagining and making sure, as Terrence said, that belonging, community, connection, that we were able to translate that into a virtual platform. And we did. And Jason, I would also be remiss if I didn't say Aim High started 3 weeks after the murder of George Floyd and the racial and social reckoning that exploded across the country. Here in San Francisco, one of the youth leaders was an Aim High graduate. So grief and trauma, we decided to really roll up our sleeves and put that at the center of Aim High at Home, which is what it was last summer. I'll kick it to Terrence to talk a little bit about how that translated into the Aim High at Home model.
Yes. So as Alec mentioned, you rewind a year ago and the pandemic is just hitting. It's being really serious. It's killing and making lots of people ill. And that is more acutely felt in Black and brown neighborhoods and communities. And then we have the George Floyd murder, along with other racial injustices that have occurred. And, I feel oftentimes, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, middle school students and what they face and what they deal with is neglected a lot. We want to shine a spotlight on our students. We want to make sure that they are heard and that their experiences are valued. And so that's what we tried to develop last year. We wanted to make it a safe space for our students to come and just share and be themselves. And like Alec mentioned, to grieve together. I think that together part is very important, and to just depend on each other during this very difficult last year that we've been in. So we focused heavily on the social emotional support. We have advising as a core piece of our summer curriculum typically, but we spotlighted that a lot more last summer. We had community circles so that students really had an opportunity to talk with each other and share with each other. We emphasized our issues and choices curriculum a lot more. And that was really at the forefront of developing Aim High at Home last summer, is how can we continue to put this sense of belonging, this sense of community with our students, with our staff, even if we are only connected by screens and not in person.
So did you feel that you had some of that core programming at the ready? You just needed to kind of dial it up? Or you should just kind of recalibrate it as opposed to inventing lots of new things?
Yeah, I think that's exactly true. I mean, the pieces of Aim High that we had last year have always been pieces of Aim High. We usually have math and science. Last year we had STEAM. We usually have a humanities class. Last year we had a book club so that we can have students focus on short stories and really dive into those stories and hopefully see themselves in those stories. And then again, we always have issues and choices and advising, but that we tweaked it up and dialed it up a notch last summer to really provide that social emotional support for our students.
The other piece that we dialed up was training for our faculty. We had 125 teachers, so less than we usually did, but we had our experienced teachers, we had our assistant teachers, many Aim High graduates. We committed to 2 teachers in most of our classrooms. And again, they were Zoom classrooms that allowed for breakout. So we expanded our training before the 5-week program to, make sure our teachers were ready to embrace Aim High at Home. And there's something I feel the impetus to mention. Every year, we have one day before the program begins where all the teachers come together to, again, set the tone for the summer. And I know this is audio, so your listeners can't see the two of us, but I'm white and Terrence is black. And Terrence gave the keynote speech. It was such a powerful moment and really set the stage for the kind of summer we wanted to create for our kids in 2020. And again, a summer of learning, a summer of openness and belonging and community. That was a huge part of what we tried to create with that week of professional development before kids came through our virtual doors. Terrence, does that capture that week before kids arrived, or is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think that we always try to prepare our teachers well for the summer. And obviously last summer was like no other. And, this was all new to us. So our training was definitely new. But fortunately, we had great resources and people that we could lean on to really make sure that our staff was prepared, not only for the curriculum and doing it over this virtual format, but as Alec mentioned, just really meeting students where they were last summer and all the issues and things that they are dealing with, and making sure that they just really feel supported and have that sense of belonging.
And Jason, if I could just conclude with one comment. I mean, one piece of data from last summer, and, just for the record and for your listeners, we served fewer kids than we typically would have. Kids were just done with online. And I think, last spring was very challenging, the immediacy of school closures and pivot and so forth. But we started with 1,300 kids and we finished with 1,200 kids. So, once they came through the door, Aim High worked. And, we had dozens, in addition to the classes that Terrence described, we had dozens of activities, some which were live, some which were on demand. Kids really took advantage of those. What we heard from families is kids need to see a world beyond their walls, beyond their homes. Kids need to feel hope and connection. And we made that happen. And we're going to make it happen again this summer.
Well, let's switch to that. And bravo for doing that. I feel like our entire field was scrambling to try to figure out what we could do. And some certainly for a variety of reasons, resources being a primary one, really struggled with that. I'm on the board of a local organization here that does summer programming. And the same, it was really challenging for exactly the reasons that you talked about, the continuation of online and having to do that. And also, I think importantly, just the evolving nature of this. Like everything was sort of changing and being unknown all the same. But summer learning is getting a lot of attention right now as people are looking for ways to support youth during what we hope is a recovery phase of this pandemic. It looks more like resources will be flowing to summer learning from the American Rescue Plan, and it was passed recently. What are the biggest challenges you're facing near term as you think about this upcoming summer and its perhaps outsized importance, but also long term for the field? I asked Aaron Dworkin, the CEO of the National Summer Learning Association, if there were Build Back Better ideas for summer learning. Terrence, you want to have a go at this one first? Let's start with this coming summer. What are the issues you'll be facing in the very near term?
I mean, I think the biggest issue is the unknown. Obviously, we have a vaccine and it is rolling out. But beyond that, we're a little bit still unclear of what that means in terms of summer and what families are expecting, what's really going to be safe versus not safe. So we have really tried to develop a program that is related to last summer and speaks to what we created then and the supports that we provided, but also how can we safely gather our students together to give them that in-person experience that so many have missed or, for the past year. But because of those unknowns, it's still hard to really plan it, but we're trying our best. We're happy with what we created and we're excited to be able to roll this program out to our students.
Alec, any thoughts on this upcoming summer and how important it is and what you'll be facing?
Yeah, well, I want to come back to your comment about summer learning being elevated, the Biden-Harris administration, the relief bill, which is now law, thankfully. And, I will say it's been very validating to see summer learning elevated, but also, literally every article I read about this elevation, it's not describing kind of your father's summer school. It's describing what we've been doing at Aim High for 35 years. So project-based learning, culturally relevant curriculum, reimagining school, great role models, college-going culture. That's what's being described in the kind of summer learning that's needed to address this crisis and, the word you used, recovery. So it has been very validating around that. And as Terrence said, it's an extremely uncertain time. And so we're trying to be nimble as we plan for the summer and trying to really be thoughtful and careful about the in-person piece. I mean, there will be an in-person piece. The degree of which we can be in person, Jason, the reality is we're dependent upon school districts. And I'm sure you read the paper, San Francisco and Oakland, it's been challenging. So, our favorite phrase at Aim High, right, Terrence, is cautious optimism. So we're looking forward to the summer. We think we're going to be growing enrollment a lot. And then my final comment, you alluded to this. What have we learned in the last year that's not going to go away? What are some things we did better in the virtual world that are always going to be part of Aim High going forward in 2022 and beyond? Because you're right, Jason, the recovery is going to be several years. Summer learning is really going to matter the next couple of years. So I think, for example, and Terrence, let me know if you agree, we did better around parent engagement and learning. We had more professional development for teachers because teachers were connecting from different campuses and regions virtually through Aim High and our platform. So there's some pieces that we're going to keep. And then as Terrence knows probably better than anybody, we have a lot of school districts that are coming to us and saying, we have some kids who could really benefit from Aim High at home this summer and Aim High in person in 2022 and beyond. So it's a tremendous opportunity for Aim High and other summer learning providers.
Well, I was going to ask you about that when you think about the future beyond this summer. And yes, granted that it's going to take a number of cycles at least to be on that process of recovery. And it's not just a recovery, it's a process that is going to be ongoing. But how do you think about Aim High in the future? You talked about the tremendous growth that you've experienced. You talked about some demand from other places. I'm sure there are folks all around the country who need programs like this, whether it's the methodologies that you use, or different components of the programming. How do you think about the future of Aim High? So almost regardless of COVID, how are you planning for your future? Where do you want to take this?
Well, that's a great question and a very timely question. When COVID and the pandemic hit, we put strategic planning on hold. I think, again, you do your homework, so you probably saw Vision 2020 on our website. So we're pausing on our next strategic plan, but it's a really interesting question because we have what we call Aim High Classic, which is our 18 programs, and I think there will be more programs. But essentially, last year, we developed a whole new business model, which is Aim High at Home. And so I know Terrence and his team are thinking about how can that model be made available to districts beyond our footprint, perhaps with support from us, but using that as a foundation to create summer learning based on our model, based on our guiding principles, curriculum, pedagogy, etc. So, it's a really exciting moment for us as an organization. And I guess, Jason, I'll say stay tuned. Because we're going to be figuring that out in the next year.
I think I would just add possibly two other things to that. So I think the one thing is reaching students and communities that are outside of our footprint, really leaning on the digital aspect to do that, and be able to provide more support for more middle school students. But in addition, I think will be how will technology evolve with our program? I think if you rewind a year, you can see that there were a lot of struggles around technology and the equity that our students face with technology. How can we address those needs and those concerns? And also, how can we help with just technological literacy for our students and help them to grow in that way? I think it will be a core piece to our future, as well as the teacher training piece. Teacher training and bringing teachers of color into the world has always been a priority for Aim High, but I think recently we've really put a lot of focus on that. And I just see that kind of skyrocketing in the future, working, more closely with teaching schools and working more closely with educators of color to really try to develop them and help them grow so that we can have more educators of color in this world.
Finally, Alec and Terrence, if there was one bit of advice based on your experience delivering summer learning programming and supporting young adolescent learning and development that you would offer to educators, both in school and in after school, and of course in summer programs, of things they either ought to know or ought to be doing, what would it be?
I would say listen to communities, dare to be different. I'll go with those two.
And I will go with summer matters. Summer has always mattered. Summer will continue to matter. I know there is a spotlight on summer this year, which is great, but let's not forget in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we will still have this gap, and we are trying to put ourselves out of business so that there is not this gap. There isn't summer learning loss, but I don't think that's going to happen for the next few years at least. So let's continue to remember how important summer is, how important it is for middle school students, and let's make sure that we are listening to our middle school students, listening to their needs and their desires, and making sure that their voices are highlighted in the work. Because when they see themselves in their teachers, when they see themselves in the work that they are studying, it's just that much more impactful on their lives.
Well, Terrence and Alec, I so enjoyed this conversation. Good luck to you this summer with Aim High. Thanks for all that you're doing, and thanks for sharing your experiences and ideas with me. It's been great to talk with you.
Thank you, Jason. It's been great.
Thanks so much, Jason. Congrats on the important work you're doing too.
That was Alec Lee and Terrence Riley of Aim High. You can follow Aim High on Twitter @AimHighProgram and online at aimhigh.org. Thanks for joining the Lessons in Adolescence podcast, a production of Remaking Middle School, an initiative that seeks to transform the learning and development experience for young adolescents in the middle school years. Remaking Middle School brings together good educational practice in school and out of school with the latest developmental science. You can learn about Remaking Middle School or find more resources about the topics of this podcast on the web at remakingmiddleschool.org. Or learn more about the founding partner organizations, the University of Virginia's Youth-Nex Center, on the web at education.virginia.edu/youth-nex, N-E-X, or on Twitter at youth_nex, and the Association for Middle Level Education on the web at amle.org or on Twitter at AMLE. The Lessons in Adolescence podcast is produced by Abby Gillespie and me, Jason Cascarino. You can listen to or download each episode at the Remaking Middle School website, on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Thanks for listening.